Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi again, and welcome back once more to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by our friends at Trailtopia. We're up to episode number 70, and this one was a bit special for me because I'm interviewing a listener and somebody I never expected to meet. This guy is Jack Masters, and he has a really special story to tell, and I'm sure that it's a story that will resonate with many of you. Now, I don't know if you recall, but I had a guest on an early show called John O'Shea, otherwise known as Skizix. John challenged me to come and join his mates in the Fat Guys Back in the Woods expedition this last July. I took him up on the challenge for my first visit back to the AT since I completed my through hike in 2014. John also threw out the challenge to listeners of the show, and Jack Masters wrote to me, actually about something completely different. As these things go, Jack and I went back and forth via email, and he ended up on our Fat Guys trip. So this show introduced me to somebody who I now regard as a friend, and my friend Jack will be on in a moment. Dr. Lynne is running out of ailments to scare you with, but she does have a few more. This week, she's talking to us about orthopedic injuries. As you'll hear, I was, yet again, completely clueless. Lynne will be on after Jack. But before we get on to those, I think it's time for lunch, don't you? How about those days when you've struggled through the morning, probably got 10 miles under your belt, and breakfast is a distant memory? It's lunchtime, and yep, you could always have your fourth Snickers of the day for yet another sugar rush. But sitting there in an empty shelter protected from the bitter wind, I'm sure you'd really rather have Trailtopia's beef-flavoured ramen noodles with green beans, corn and mushrooms. Tea-flippin'-licious. And if you need to go without the gluten, all of Trailtopia's ramen noodle lunches and light dinners are available gluten-free. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. Oh, while I remember, we've also got the next chapter of Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer, so it's quite a full show today. Now, let's hear from my buddy, Jack. Okay, I'd like to introduce you to a listener who heard about the trip a couple of us were going on, the Fat Guys, and it turned out to be the Fat Guys and Gals back in the woods. But this man, Jack Masters, he is now going to be one of the class of 2018. So hi, Jack, how are you?
Hi, Mighty Blue. How are you? I'm doing fine.
So he knows me as Mighty Blue anyway, and we'll come on to that in a sec. Now, you've been listening to the show for a while, and you reached out when I mentioned the Fat Guys trip last year, and I know you'd already had a difficult year. Did you? Do you want to tell us what happened last year?
Okay, let's see. In early last year, after a long illness, my wife passed away, and which it was a difficult time for me, of course. After 28 years of marriage, and although it was not unexpected, but still, it was still a shock. And then within a couple of months after that, my company offered a deal where I could retire with some severance. So I went ahead and took advantage of that. I was past 65, and I thought, well, I might as well. Actually, I was 66 at the time, and thought I might as well do that. So I went through a lot of change early last year, and then later in the year, I sold my house and almost all my possessions, and bought a truck and a truck camper, and that's my home now. So
wow! Anyway. So you really did have quite a year, 2017, and it felt like a transition. So you reached out initially to me. What made you want to get involved in the Fat Guys trip?
I've been listening since I've become interested the last few years in doing a long distance hike of, I wasn't sure what trail, and I had been listening to your podcast, and I remember you did the show.
And hang on, that still made you want to do it?
No, I've been listening and enjoying it very much. It was great driving back and forth to work. I just put, because I started out and you already had many episodes out there, and I just listened to episode after episode back to back. And you'd mentioned in one of them GRIZ's spreadsheet, and I initially emailed you about that.
That's
to
right.
get a copy of that, and then we got the emailing back and forth about, and you mentioned, we talked about fat guys, and I thought, well, maybe, and you asked me, you were kind enough to ask me, if I'd be interested in joining you guys. And so I thought, well, I'm retired. I don't have anything, to do this summer. I might as well spend a week of suffering in the woods. So,
well, we didn't let you down there, did we? There was certainly plenty of that. Oh dear. So had you done any backpacking in the past then?
In my younger years, I did, in Boy Scouts. Actually, our troop went to Philmont Scout Ranch out in New Mexico and spent a week backpacking out there. And then also probably my 20s, early mid 20s, I used to go to the Ozarks and did some backpacking and canoeing down there, and some short backpacking trips, might be 3 or 4 days, something like that. And then the last 10 years or so, I started to realize I'm not going to be young forever. So,
by the way, isn't that a fantastic realization to have?
Right,
you're not going to be young forever.
So I decided I got into exercise and even got into running for a while and did a couple of 5Ks over the age of 60.
Good for
and
you.
Also I started a lot of day hiking around the Kansas City area, and took a trip out to Colorado a couple of 3 years ago and did day hikes out there at high elevation. But I haven't done any real backpacking until this year in a long time. It's been quite a while since I've done any backpacking and camping out.
So what was you say you got early retirement. What were you retired from?
I was a database administrator. I was in IT. I've been doing that for many years. And I was tired. I was tired of actually, I stood behind the desk. I got a standing desk. But I was really, it was good work and good experience. And I enjoyed my work days, but I'm sure glad they're behind me.
So you were actually in computers before there was such a thing as Facebook. How about that? And
that's true.
They've been going a long time, haven't they? Computers. I mean, that's longer than most of us think. I remember once I was when I first started work in the City of London. It was 1971. And I went to a job bureau, and they said to me, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, one of my mates is in computers." He said, "Absolute flash in the pan. They will never last." This was 1971. So I went into the much more exciting industry of insurance.
Right,
oh my gosh! Yeah. So anyway, you signed on for the Fat Guys. And actually, it turned out to be the Fat Guys and Gals back in the woods, didn't it?
That's true.
So, which was lovely. And you signed on, and I think it was the 1st of July, maybe the 2nd of July. We met that first morning in the car park, ready for the shuttle to Newfound Gap. We met at Nantahala Outdoor Centre. What were your first impressions of the group, and did you think there was a good fit there?
Well, I wasn't sure what to think. Of course, we had you and Sherpa and John Skizik, who've all done through hikes, so I was probably a little bit intimidated. And,
really?
And well,
you must have looked at us and thought, I can't be intimidated by these.
And then Nate, who was he's younger than I am, that's for sure. I'm not sure what his age is. He's still an army major, and he's obviously in good shape and fit. And then let's see, am I missing anybody? And then the two young ladies who are obviously they're young and very fit.
Skates and Golden.
I'm sorry.
Skates and Golden.
You're right. Skates and Golden. Yeah. And the main thing I was worried about was, would I be able to keep up with you guys? I didn't want to hold you back. That was my main concern. But I guess I did okay. I wasn't. John Skizik always says he always says I'm the slowest. I will come in last, and so I was able to pretty much stay way ahead of him, but nobody else.
He had terrible chafing, didn't he? Awful.
Right. Yeah.
He's going to love to hear that, by the way.
Yeah.
But so we got started, and it really was quite tough, wasn't it? Those first couple of days, and I was starting to doubt that I actually done the AT. How was it for you, particularly those first few days out of Newfound Gap?
It was the whole 6 days, however long we were out there, was tough. Because, well, for one thing, we were doing 10 to 12 miles a day, like the second day or something like that. And when I start out here in February, I don't plan on doing near that many miles every day at the beginning.
Well, hang on. Did you look at the? You got that spreadsheet I sent you of Grizz's.
Yeah.
He's got a very clear plan of very few miles in those early miles, hasn't he?
Right.
I mean, really low number.
Yeah, and I have AWOL's guide, and I've looked at that a lot, especially the first few pages to plan. But of course, I know that it's not, if you plan everything down to detail, it's going to go out the window the first day anyway. But it was difficult. Like I say, that week in July we spent out there, the miles and my gosh, the ups and downs.
Oh yeah, you're gonna get. I tell you what, man, you're gonna get plenty of those when you get really on the AT.
I know. I know. In fact, I'm already thinking about some of the like when we went into NOC, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to climb that. I'm going to have to climb up that when I'm going northbound. It's like, oh my gosh. But
that's a long way. That's a long way uphill, right. Isn't it? That really is, because it was a hell of a long way downhill, wasn't it?
I know. Yeah. But even, the first day I think it was the first day we went to Clingman's Dome, because it wasn't very far from Newfound Gap, if I remember correctly.
Yes, you're right. It wasn't that far.
That's the highest point on the AT, but it was a lot of miles. It seemed like sometimes I thought I would never get to the top of a mountain.
Don't you find that's one of the things I learned, that when you're hiking the AT, hiking anywhere, I guess, but you have all these what seem to be false summits, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah, you round a bend, you think that's got to be it there,
and it never is.
No. Until finally it is. That's one thing. I think somebody, either you or John, maybe it's John Skeetic said, eventually you'll get there. Just keep going, and you will get there. But you don't have any choice.
I said to you at the time, there wasn't a single mountain that beat us, was there? We got up and over every single one. It took us a long time, but we got up and over all of them, didn't we?
That's true. We did make it. We made it.
Apart from finishing at Nantahala Outdoor Centre, what was the highlight of the trip for you?
Apart from finishing, that was. Well, I was going to say going into Fontana and being able to sleep in a bed there. But no, I enjoyed first of all, just being out on the trail and being out, even though it rained, every day except the last day, I think.
Yes. That's right.
But that I actually learned, or I don't know, maybe people do this when they're out there after a while. You start enjoying it sucks, but you enjoy it. You probably heard the term "embrace the suck," and one of my most memorable memories was that day that you and I and John got out while the shuttle driver went back and took up everybody else, and we started climbing. We had to climb. Had a long climb ahead of us that morning.
That's right.
And as soon as we got out of the vehicle and started climbing, it just started pouring. It was just up. We couldn't even hear each other. We tried to talk. It was pouring so hard, and we're going up and up and up. And when I was driving home after that trip, it's like that was one of my favorite times out there, because it was. Maybe it's a sense of accomplishment. You feel like if I can get through this, I can get through. I've been through worse, and that's what I always have to tell myself in my life. Early last year, I went through a lot worse things than anything the trail can throw at me. But still, it's a physical challenge and a mental challenge. Can I get through this? So that's. I know it might sound crazy, but I did enjoy that morning.
I totally understand.
That hill in the rain. Yeah,
I totally understand. And part of it, though, Jack, for me anyway, is that I think to myself, if I'm suffering, I'm going uphill and it's hard and it's raining and it's was that the morning there was thunder and lightning as well?
Yes, later on it did thunder and lightning. Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing you can do other than to keep going, is there? I mean, there is virtually no alternative to keeping going, and it's the fact that there is no alternative that you do keep going, and I love that part of it. I really do.
Right.
Now, you got a trail name from the Fat Guys. Tell the listeners what it was, and I know it's changed, but that how you got it was a really funny one. So tell us what happened.
Okay, I was talking to the group, and one evening after we got done, we were sitting around. And I was explained that I got some trekking poles, some hiking poles, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, especially when I knew I was going to go to Colorado and be up in high altitude.
Yeah.
And I've been, reading and about hiking and watching videos and that sort of thing, and realized the hiking poles are, for me, my gosh, I can't imagine hiking without them now. So I bought this set of poles from REI, and first time I had them out on do a day hike, I've been hiking along, and I looked down and saw an L on the strap on one of the poles, and I thought, oh my gosh, these are large. I should have maybe I should have checked around at REI, because I'm a short guy. Maybe I should have got a medium. And I hiked on a little farther, and I happened to look down at the other pole and saw the R. And that's when I realized that L is for left and R is for right, not large. So again, I'm going to mention John Skeezix. He thought that was hilarious, and he gave me the trail name of Lefty Righty, that I was known as on the trail for our trip. Anyway, so.
Now, I'm sure John isn't the sort of person to be offended by this, but you've decided not to keep Lefty Righty for the trail itself. What is you've actually named yourself, which I personally think is the best idea of all. So what is your trail name going to be for your through hike this year?
Okay. My trail name now is Vagabond Jack. And one reason I took that name is, well, when I knew I was going to retire, so I ordered some business cards to give the people at work, so I wouldn't have to write down, my phone number or email address, that sort of thing. So I just want some cards to give people. And when I was ordering the cards, I started to put retired on the, as occupation on the card. And I thought, that's boring. So I put vagabond, because I knew I was going to be, selling my house and traveling around the country. And then I started a Facebook page called The Adventures of Vagabond Jack. So my family and friends can follow me on there if they want to. That way they don't have to. If they don't want to, if they don't want to follow my page, that's fine. But that way, when I travel around, like I went to Florida earlier this year, or early, I guess it was last year, and posted some pictures of that, and some wrote up some of my thoughts about being on the road and that type of thing. So anyway, so I kind of have developed this. I don't say persona, but a brand or whatever you want to call it, a Vagabond Jack. So I thought it might be easier, for my family and friends to find me like on trail journals. That's my name on there now. So that's why I went ahead and changed it. And I hope John's not offended, because I did like Lefty Righty. But if I ever go back out with fat guys and gals,
Lefty Righty for those purposes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you're Vagabond Jack. Now as you say, you've had quite the year. Because even your living conditions have changed as well. Has it been the year itself was a catalyst for something different in your life, and you've changed your living arrangements and everything like that. Right. So was the through hike literally on the horizon when you joined us last year, or did you decide to do it as a result?
For years, probably at least 5 years, I've read I don't know how many trail journals from not just the AT, but the PCT, CDT, and American Discovery Trail, which a lot of people aren't familiar with. But and I went through, and because I guess I'll go back and explain. My wife had been so sick for so long that it was. I mean, it's like we're talking over 5 years that she said she had so many problems, and that I started thinking, years ago, I guess, okay, what am I going to do, after she's gone? Right. And I realized that a long trek would be a great thing to do, especially since I was getting into day hiking, and I enjoy it so much being outside and hiking. And I thought, I'd considered the AT very definitely. Like even before our excursion, I'd kind of decided that the AT, being an old fart like me, I hope it's okay if I say that word on your show.
Yeah, I think it would be okay. That's not what we need to beep out. That's okay.
but being older and not, I'm in decent shape, but I'm not, in the best of shape in the world. That I from what I've read, that it probably has a better support system. If you have more chance to you have to get off the trail, you can get off the trail. You don't have to carry 10 days worth of food. Most places, you can get by with 3 or 4 days worth of food. And whereas some of the other hikes appear to me that to be, you're more on your own. From what I've read.
Yeah, you know what? It is definitely so much more accessible than from what I've read about any of the others, because you can get off the AT every other day quite easily. You really can.
Right. Yeah. And they have the shelters, and huts. Most, of course, not every place, but there's always should always be some people around if you really get in trouble. I mean, I'm sure there will be time there won't be, but that's okay. So I'd considered, really wanted to do a long hike, and I'd kind of decided on the AT. And then after we did our trip, as I was driving back to Missouri, I kind of thought, I don't know if I want to do this or not. This is really hard. It almost convinced me not to. But
Skeezix, you listen to this. That's funny.
But the more I got away from it, I get, it's kind of like the, people do this, the more you get away from something, the more you glamorize it or whatever. Yeah. And I've tried not to do that, but the more I thought about it, I thought if I really want to do this, I've wanted, thought about it for years. And if I don't do it now, because I'm 66 now, I'm going to turn 67 in March. Yeah. And if I don't, if in 5 years, I'll look back at myself and say, geez, why didn't I?
You're totally correct. And it's what you said. You did embrace the suck. I could see every day, and I know because I was suffering myself. You and I were suffering all the way through that. It was hard work. We did, in that week, we did 70 miles. And for a first week, that is a heck of a lot to start. Or 67 miles, something like that. Yeah. And yet we did it. I always think this. There hasn't been a single mountain on the AT I couldn't get up. I mean, I couldn't do the elevation on the John Muir Trail, but the elevation's not an issue, too much of an issue on the AT. And you just keep going, and suddenly you're at the top. I mean, do you remember that day we went to? Was it Chihuahua Board? I think it was. We hiked up in that terrible storm, as we said, and then right near the top it stopped, and we all sat around at the top. It was just beautiful, wasn't it?
Oh,
absolutely
beautiful. And the rain kind of let up, I think, for a while. And it was.
Now, I know you referred to earlier on you've been traveling around. Where have you been in the last few months then? Because you've had this, you say you got a trailer.
Yeah, well, it's not a trailer. Actually, it's a truck camper. It's a slide-in camper.
All right, yeah.
Truck bed. Yeah. So it makes me a little more mobile. Well, I took a trip. See, I'm trying to think. I need to go back and read my Facebook page so I can remember where. Well, I haven't been to that many places.
Jack, I know you're 67, but needing to go back to read your Facebook page to remind you where you've been is not impressive, I've got to tell you.
But I'm trying to think if I'm leaving something out. But the first, I'd been around here in, in November, and it started getting cold, and I wanted to. I guess this is before Thanksgiving yet, and I'd wanted to get away from the cold, so I just started driving south. Right. I've been to that Kansas City area. I wanted to drive south, and so I headed down to. Ended up in the Florida Panhandle because it finally got warm down there, and it was really nice. And then I headed up to. Southern Georgian state. I've learned about boondocking, which is doing traveling like this. If you're living in your RV, there are groups you can join. And boondocking is where you go to somebody's, usually a farm or a place, and they let you just camp there for free. And
nice.
You might buy them a little gift or something. And I found a really, really cool place in southern Georgia, which I may go to a couple weeks before I start my trip. And this guy has this big farm out in southern Georgia, and he rescues horses. So he has all these horses out there, and they roam around your camper and everything, and it's quite the place. And then that's when I headed back up to the mountain crossing, which is at Neal Gap on that trip.
Oh, that's right. Yes, you didn't. Right. You did a little class, didn't you, as well?
Right. Yeah, I took an AT prep class there for 3 days, which really helped with gear weight and also with winter clothing. That I learned a lot and got some clothing. I have a down jacket and down pants now.
Right. So, and did that help you? That prep? Give them a shout out. So, say who it is, because I know they're good people.
So, Scott and Ariane, backpacker backpacker.tv. I'm sorry. Is that it? Is that it? I can't,
I think it is.
Yeah. And they teach this class. It's at Mountain Crossing, which is the outfitter there at Neil Gap. And they did a pack shakedown for me. I guess, everybody that comes through on the AT, it's the first major stop, if I understand it correctly. And they will do a pack shakedown and help you get rid of unnecessary equipment. So we
they send back a lot of stuff, don't they, from there? They really do every year.
Yeah.
So how much did you lose when Scott and Ariane looked at your pack? What did you lose?
I was pretty good already. I was probably in the 20s, mid to upper 20s, and we got my pack weight down to 21.4 pounds. Wow. And that includes 3 days of food and 2 liters of water. So,
man, that's good.
If I can keep my weight down to, close to 20 pounds, that would be good.
As a comparison, what were you carrying when you were on the AT with us?
Oh, I bet I was over 30.
I bet you were. I thought you were at least as much as me.
I'm not sure, but I was. I'm sure I had way too much food. In fact, I know I did. That's one thing I learned from Scott and Ariane was you don't need to carry near as much food as you think you do.
No, you're probably right. Actually, yeah. So now I know you're starting your through very soon. Actually, aren't you? I think is it 1st of February or sometime early February?
I'm planning on starting the 1st of February. I had some doctor's appointments around. I want to make sure I'm physically. I did get a clean bill of health from my doctor, by the way.
Right.
but I had doctor's appointments. I had a dermatologist appointment this morning to spray this stuff in your face to get rid of those little things. Anyway, so I've been taking care of that type of thing, or I would have already been down. I would probably already be heading that way. Say, "Oh, the heck with it! I'm as ready as I'm going to be." That's the way I feel. There are a few minor things I have to finish up, but yeah, I plan on starting around the 1st of February, if not the 1st, and that's my date I've set.
So is your gear? You've got winter gear, particularly now. You're going to change that out once you get a few months into it.
I will probably. I'll probably keep the down jacket. One of the videos was Darwin or Bigfoot. They said, they kept the down jacket all year long because it really comes in handy even in the summertime. And you're sitting around the campfire, and it's such lightweight. It's a few ounces. Right. The down pants I probably won't need. I know I won't need them this summer. But so I'll probably send those back.
So did you have any? This is such a life change for you. It really has been the last 12 months. Did you have any gear for this, or have you had to buy everything new?
I'm trying to see the trekking poles. I know that. Darn near everything else.
Hang on, Jack. Go check your Facebook to find out.
No. I had the trekking poles. Everything else I've pretty much bought new. I went through a couple. I'm on my second pack though, because I ended up getting. I don't know if I can get a shout out to the company or not, but a extremely lightweight pack.
What is it?
I got rid of
is it good?
The other one.
What's the pack then?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Z packs.
Oh, people seem to love Z packs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that a recommendation? Was that a recommendation for somebody else again?
That was probably from recommendation from Outdoor Gear Lab.
All right. I see. Right. And how much did it weigh? Yeah, I did all the time.
I think the pack itself is around a pound.
Oh my gosh, mine was over 5 pounds.
yeah. I might be it may be a little bit more than a pound. I'm not sure on that. But the other thing is it's waterproof and does not require a rain cover.
Wow.
Although I will put a trash bag liner inside it in case there's any issues.
Yeah.
And I got some more dry bags also from Z-Pack.
Right.
They're made of that Cuban fiber that's real crinkly, but you know what I'm talking about. And
you're a tent man, aren't you? I seem to remember you had a tent.
Yeah,
You keep the same tent?
Yeah. The Big Agnes copper spur. What is it? UL ultralight H2. I don't know whatever it is. Anyway, I can't remember all the names of the gear. So it's a not I forget what it weighs exactly, but it's an ultralight tent.
Wow.
And then for the sleeping bag, I got REI Magma 10 or something like that. And it's a good, for the winter bag, it is extremely warm.
Yeah, what degree is it? What degree?
And I believe it is, let's just look at it right here, right now. I believe it's 10. I mean, 20, I think is covered, but I think if I remember right, I was looking at the tag on it, and it. So anyway, at any rate, yeah.
So you got your stuff. You're ready to go then. Are you going to cook food, or did you try to keep weight down by not taking a stove?
I'm gonna. I switched stoves out. That's one thing I did at Mountain Crossing.
All right.
I switched this little stove out to the look almost like the tin cans from a Vienna sausage.
Right.
and you pour denatured alcohol in there and you light it and it's a fire. You just need a little windscreen around it. And denatured alcohol is nothing other than heat, that HET in the yellow bottle. They may not have that in Florida. Up around this part of the country, they have it because it goes in gasoline engines, in the gas tank, so that the gas doesn't freeze in the wintertime.
So you're ready to go now. You got all your stuff, or you still got one or two more things still to buy?
Just a few minor things. I want to go through my first aid kit and make sure I have everything I need there. I may pick up a few things for that, and I need to get. I'm only planning on 2, maybe 3 boxes to get shipped to me, and I need to get those ready. But
tell you what, Jack, I'm very envious. I know that when we first met, we didn't know you. You didn't know us, and that. And then you started talking about going on the AT, and I thought, well, so he must be bloody crazy, But you've proved, as if proof were ever needed, that it doesn't matter how old you are. There is no mountain you can't get up, is there? You can do it. I mean, and you're gonna. I mean, you may or may not do it. I don't know, but you're going to be certainly make a go at it. And I know what you were like on the trail. You said, "I'll get there. I'll get there in the end. I may be a bit slower, but I'll get there in the end." And I suspect you're going to get to the end at Katahdin as well. And I'm just so excited for you, man. I tell you, I really am so excited for you.
Well, thank you. I'm trying not to even think of Katahdin. I'm just trying to think of,
think of North Carolina.
Make it through this day. Yeah. I want to get to North Carolina. Then I'll worry about the next state.
Yeah. Dear. Well, look, it's been absolute delight to talk with you. I loved your company on the Fat Guys, and I've been following you. I've been following your journal all the way. And when you're halfway through, let's catch up again. I want to speak to you when you get somewhere near Harper's. Give me a shout, and we'll jump on the phone. We'll have another little chat then. All right.
Well, that sounds good, and thank you for inspiring me and a lot of other hikers.
I appreciate it.
It was an honor to be out there on the trail with a star. Anyway,
shut up.
and we didn't even give you a hard time about the 4th of July either.
No, you didn't. That's right. I know.
Because we were out on the 4th of July. But anyway.
Yeah. So, well, look, have a great time. I know you will have a great time. Enjoy it, embrace the suck, and enjoy the moment. Be in the moment all the time, because that is so important when you're there. And you're going to love these young people. They're going to make you feel younger yourself. So good for you. And we will definitely catch up. Okay, when you're somewhere near halfway, let me know, and I'll be following you anyway. But let me know, and we'll have a chat when you're actually on the trail. All right.
That sounds great. Thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate it.
Okay, buddy. All the best then.
Okay.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye, Steve. Okay. Bye.
How about that? He lost his wife, grieved greatly, no doubt, then set about redesigning his life. He's not a young man, he's even older than me, but he took on the challenge and went for it. I think we could all learn from Jack's spirit. I don't know if he's going to be able to finish the AT, and it doesn't really matter though, does it? He's picked himself up from a personal tragedy and looked for the next thing in his life. Maybe the AT is that thing. All I know is that I'll be avidly following along with Jack and cheering him every step of the way. He made me laugh though. After spending a week with fat guys and gals, he had second thoughts about doing a through hike. But I tell you, once it gets into your system, it's a really tough thing to shake off. And it all seemed better with the benefit of a bit of time. So I hope you follow along with Jack. I'll put a link in the show notes to his blog. Now, Dr. Lynne educates this fool on the various catastrophes that can befall you from an orthopedic point of view. As you're about to hear, I wouldn't have had a clue what that even meant before speaking with Lynne. So I guess it's good to know that I am supremely qualified to ask Lynne the idiot questions. Here's the doc. And we are back on with Dr. Lynne. Hi Lynne, how are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Well, we're talking about orthopedic injuries in the backcountry this week, and I tell you, I didn't really know what that meant, which shows what a dumb chap I am. So what exactly are orthopedic injuries and what range do they cover?
These are basically injuries that include bones, joints, sometimes muscles, fractures, sprains, dislocations, those types of things.
Which I suspect there are plenty in the back country.
Yes, there are some of the more common injuries, probably right up there with blisters.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. So, and I'm looking at your notes you've made, and there's something that goes through a lot of the notes and a lot of the injuries and things that one might face on the trail. Is the goal is to make the patient as functional as possible to facilitate self-rescue and avoid the need for outside assistance. Amen to that. But there are times, of course, when you're going to need outside assistance, aren't you?
Right. But I guess the big thing to be prepared for is knowing how to evaluate either yourself, if you get an injury, or one of your group who gets an injury, whether or not they can safely self-evacuate, which is clearly a much better option than waiting for help to come.
Right. So how can you evaluate yourself? Say you're just by yourself. How do you evaluate yourself?
So one of the things is if you have a significant amount of pain, there's a big difference between an upper body injury and a lower body injury. Clearly, if you have an upper body injury, your legs are fine. You can, even if you have a broken bone or a dislocated shoulder, something like that, you should be able to walk out on your own 2 feet, literally. So with upper body injuries, being able to stabilize the injury to cause minimal amount of pain while you're actually evacuating is the best thing to do.
Stabilize being literally the word. You literally try to keep it as still as possible, I presume.
Exactly. For instance, if you have a shoulder dislocation or an injury, or if you break your arm, the best thing to do is to put it in a sling and then make sure that the sling is attached to your body so it's not flapping around in the breeze.
It's not nice.
Once you're stable like that, then you can try a few steps, walk a little bit. If you find that motion of walking is really jarring, then you might want to readjust yourself. You know, one of the things in the backcountry, believe it or not, is with injuries and emergencies, we actually have the luxury of time. We're not rushing to the emergency room. It's probably a better idea to try different positions or different ways of stabilizing an injury before you just start moving out. Walk around a little bit, see if you're able to sustain that position for a long period of time. And if you don't, stop, readjust, do it again until you say, okay, I feel comfortable enough that I can walk out.
Well, one thing you're saying here, which makes a lot of sense to me, is look, listen, and feel, which I presume is the diagnostic part of it.
Yes. What you want to do is if you have an injury, you want to look at the injury. Does it look dislocated at an odd angle? Is the skin broken, or is it actively bleeding? Because then that will determine what your next step is. Are you going to need to splint this? Are you going to need to stabilize it in place? Are you going to need help evacuating? And it's important not just to look at what for instance, the angle of the leg looks like. You want to actually look at the skin. So you want to lift the pant leg or remove the pant leg or remove the boot or something like that to take a look at the actual injury, because if for some reason it's actively bleeding, you want to stop that before you proceed further. And you won't know that unless you're actually looking at the injury.
Yeah, the next thing you said, which made me laugh, was listen to the victim. Did the victim hear a snap, crackle, or a pop?
We love that in medicine. You know, did it hear snap, crackle, or pop? That's exactly what you're going to listen for. Yes, ask the victim, did they hear anything when they had that injury? For instance, the classic Achilles tendon rupture, the patient will say, it sounds like a gunshot.
Wow.
Okay, so that's very, very distinctive of an Achilles tendon rupture.
Wow.
The other thing is listen to the patient. Can they put weight on it? They might have rolled their ankle or really banged their knee. But if they feel like they can bear some weight, they can get either to the next shelter or they can get to the next road. And that's very important. But if they're in so much pain that they can't put weight on it, then you'll have to figure out the next alternative for getting help.
Yeah, which is not good, is it?
No. So that's look, that's listen, and then feel is, again, at the area of the injury, you want to feel the area. Is it tender? Is it warm? Is there pain on what we call active range of motion versus passive range of motion? And active range of motion is when you move the leg or the arm yourself. You're doing the moving.
Right.
Passive range of motion is when your leg is out and somebody else is actually moving it for you. And this can help differentiate between...
Well, hey, I don't understand that. So literally, if the person is trying to walk on it or is trying to move their arm, that's the active range of motion. But if somebody else is doing it for them, that makes a difference?
It does. And the reason is when you're moving your arm, you're using your muscles to move those bones back and forth.
Yeah.
But if somebody else is moving your arm, your muscles don't have to do any work.
Yes, I do understand.
That's an important distinction, because if you don't have any pain when somebody else is moving your arm back and forth, that indicates more of a strain or sprain as opposed to a fracture. Okay?
Oh, interesting.
Okay. So that can be one way that you can distinguish between fractures and sprains.
Right, but it's funny actually. Your notes this week seem to be all full of acronyms. There's AROM, active range of motion, PROM or PROM, which is passive range of motion. Now you've got CSM, circulation, sensation, and motion. I don't know whether you're in a hurry writing these, or these are actually acronyms
these are all
you use.
medical terms that we use very, very specifically.
There's a couple of beauties later on as well.
Oh yes, some of them are real, and some of them are just so that you can remember. CSM is something that you'll see in anybody who's a first responder, anybody who is like in a nurse or a physician, and that stands for circulation, sensation, and motion. And that's how we check whether somebody's fingers, arms, toes, or legs, something like that, is operating properly, is working properly. Circulation, you want to see, are their toes blue, or are their toes white, or are their toes red? If you pinch the toe and it goes white, does it fill back up again, turn red again? That shows good circulation. Sensation, if I touch your left toe, your left great toe, and I say, which toe am I touching? And you can tell me, that means that the person's sensation is intact. And motion, wiggle your toes. Can you wiggle your toes? Yes, I can wiggle my toes. Good. If all of those are normal, then you know that area is not injured. Very, very important, not only just at the acute injury, but if, for instance, you're splinting somebody, or you've got a compress bandage there to stop bleeding, you want to make sure that you're not cutting off circulation or doing any nerve entrapment, or pinching a nerve there. So you want to make sure that if the CSM is intact at the beginning, you want to make sure it stays that way as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Okay. Now I really want to move on to this one, which is most general injuries respond to rice.
Yes. Actually, most people might know what rice is for orthopedic
As you can tell, I know nothing about any of this. So rice, okay. What's rice?
Right. Rest, ice, compression, and elevation.
Yeah. So
if somebody has an orthopedic injury, first if you can ice on it. Well, that's not really something you can do in the backcountry, but maybe you can find something cold like your water bottle or a cold stream. Something cooler than the air to, again, help reduce inflammation. Compression means wrapping it snugly, not too tight that you cut off circulation, but enough that you can help again, reduce the swelling that could potentially get there. And elevation, meaning above heart level, and that also will help reduce the swelling.
Okay, all right. As soon as you mentioned those things, I understood what rice was, obviously. So you talked about shoulder injuries should have a sling, and the sling should be secured. You mentioned that earlier on. Now there's the next one, which is arm injuries should have a splint. Make it buff. What's buff?
Oh, yes. A splint should be buff, and that means big, ugly, fat, and fluffy. Now remember, when you're out in the backcountry and you are not a wilderness first responder, you're going to have all sorts of things in your backpack that you could actually use to make a splint. This is actually an exercise we did in our wilderness first aid course, and it was a blast. The exercise was, okay, you have an arm injury. We worked in partners. Somebody had an arm injury, and you had to use whatever was in your backpack in order to make a splint and secure it so that the patient could be evacuated.
Wow.
And all sorts of things came out. Tent poles, a puffy jacket, duct tape, trekking poles was another good one. People who had those Z-Lite sleeping pads, the closed-cell foam sleeping pads. Those are wonderful to make splints.
Wow.
Yeah, and so you want to pad it really well so that the arm doesn't get further injured. So it's got to be big so that the padding is thick, fat, and fluffy. So that, again, it's like you're cradling it like a carton of eggs.
Wow. That's useful, really useful to know. So you say about with fingers, you splint them by taping the injured finger next to the next finger. Yes, I've done that in the past myself as well. Yeah,
both fingers and toes are really easy to splint because you've got your automatic splint, the neighboring finger right there.
Okay.
Very helpful.
Okay, so what other things should we look out for?
So lower limb injuries are a little bit more difficult because, again, clearly they're weight bearing. In the civilized world, sometimes we are told don't put weight on it if it's injured or if it's broken, and that's true. Now, if you're in the backcountry, that may not be an option. If you can somehow or other safely get to a point where you can be evacuated, it might be better for you to actually try to put weight, or at least partial weight bearing, on the leg in order to get help. That may mean if it's sprained or if it's broken, splinting it and using something for a crutch, a trekking pole, a nice big stick. Again, very important to try this out before you go very far. And that goes also without saying for instance, somebody who might have a pelvic fracture or a pelvic dislocation or a hip fracture, they really probably can't walk.
I would think not.
Yeah. And so you'll have to manufacture some sort of a cot or a litter to be able to actually have them lie on it and then carry them to safety. Wow. Well, now you've got all these things in your backpack again. You have to figure out how to make this stretcher for them. You got to try it out first. Okay. So somebody who's not injured, lie on this makeshift litter, on this makeshift stretcher, and carry them a couple of feet. Is it going to hold? And if it is, then you're good to go. And if it's not, you got to regroup and try it again. You certainly don't want to drop somebody who's already injured and get a further injury.
I would think not. Now, you talk about knee injuries as well, which is a similar problem, isn't it?
Yeah, knee injuries are tough to tell in the backcountry whether or not there's especially the patella, which is that kneecap, whether or not there's a fracture or whether it's just a soft tissue injury. They both act very similarly. And I actually had a patient of mine who's a hockey coach who fell on her knee, her patella, and didn't think it was bad enough, so she skated through the entire rest of the 2-hour session.
Oh, my gosh.
And it was fractured, actually, in 3 places.
Wow. Wow.
So it's very hard to tell the difference because of the swelling and the pain in the area. Okay. So you have to treat it just the same way. Just splint it and get out to get evaluation.
And you finish this by saying orthopedic injuries in the backcountry are common, and I strongly recommend you take a wilderness first aid course. You've mentioned that before, and just remind people where they can sign up for those.
A lot of those courses are through the organization called NOLS, National Outdoor Leadership School.
Yeah.
Also, Wilderness Medical Society has very good courses. And REI also they help sponsor courses through the Wilderness Medical Society and NOLS to bring wilderness first aid courses to pretty much anybody in the United States. If you go onto REI, and this is I'm not sponsored by REI. I'm just saying this is how we actually found it.
Nor am I wish I was.
Yeah. If you go onto REI and you look at Wilderness First Aid, they will be able to tell you where all the courses are. And they're 16-hour courses. They're usually done in 2 8-hour days over a weekend.
That's a lot, isn't it? Man.
They have so much valuable information. Now, me as a physician, my husband and I did it. My husband's a physician as well. Right. The two of us learned so much because, we do medicine in a civilized world. So being able to understand first aid in the backcountry is very different.
I'm sure it is. Okay. Well, look, thanks for that, Lynne. I think we've probably got one, maybe two more, but we're going to use your knowledge of one of the trails as well as we sort of wean ourselves off Dr. Lynne and DocSpot, aren't we, at some stage in the future?
Yeah, I'm hoping to get a couple of trails in a couple of weeks out west, and if I do that, I'd be thrilled to be able to tell you about them.
That'd be super. All right. Well, I'll speak with you soon, but thanks very much for telling us about all these horrible injuries we're going to get this year.
All right. I hope everybody stays safe out there.
Yeah. Cheers, then. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. I thought that was a really good one, and as always, full of actionable advice. When Lynne and I talked about post-trail depression recently, several people wrote of their own experiences on the multitude of Facebook posts that I upload when an episode comes out. I'm going to collate those reactions, and Lynne and I will follow up that previous episode with a discussion on what we heard and what, if anything, you can do to take the edge off that depression if it hits you. We're not saying that there are necessarily definitive answers, but there seem to be a few steps you can take to save you the worst of it. That'll be coming in a couple of weeks. Hope you're all listening to our other podcasts, Returning to Katahdin, every Monday morning with Bruce Matson. This coming Sunday, Bruce and I are discussing his winter supplement, the items he'll be taking to ward off that bowel-churning cold that he's bound to face by leaving so early. Don't forget also to check out the offerings from Trailtopia, our sponsor. And I'm delighted to tell you that they've extended their original 3-month relationship with our shows through the summer. This really means a lot to me, and I hope that you support the show by supporting Trailtopia. Next week, we've got a section hiker on the show. Many of you have written saying you'd like to hear more from section hikers, so I'm going to be speaking with Matt Philippi. I meant to record Matt last year, but as so often happens with me, I screwed up and didn't get back to him. Happily, we got in contact again recently, and Matt will be our guest next week. By the way, I know that I've contacted quite a few people about being interviewed on the show, and I haven't followed up further with you. This is only because I got so behind from about Thanksgiving time that I've been struggling to catch up ever since. Things are improving, so I will be in touch with some of you very soon. We're up to Chapter 7 of Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer. He's really bringing back memories for me. I so remember the towpath after Harper's Ferry, and he's talking about it. It feels to me as if we have that shared memory of the place, separated by 70 years. It's still there, and we both walk the same path. I love that. I also remember the parks in Pennsylvania. Earl's memories of the parks are more of his childhood. Mine are that I could order pizza from them. How times change. I'll see you next week. Chapter 7, South Mountain Stroll. Out on the blue horizon, under an aerial sky, with aspect always sylvan, the days go strolling by. North of the bridge, the trail looped down to the towpath of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, long since abandoned. The idea for a canal originated with George Washington before he became president to provide a transportation route to the west. The towpath is now a National Historical Park. The AT follows it for about 3 miles until turning up Weatherton Cliffs to the crest of South Mountain. This extension of the Blue Ridge is not high in comparison with other parts of the Appalachian Range, but stands well above the adjacent countryside. Ledges like those in the Shenandoah extend for miles, with sheer precipices. At the top of Weatherton Cliffs are traces of fortifications made by Union soldiers. This vintage point is a favourite with picnickers, hardy enough to make the climb. Farther north is Crampton Gap, a key position when General Lee tried to cross South Mountain to outflank and threaten Washington. In the gap is a gigantic archway memorial to war correspondents, erected by George Alfred Townsend. Nearby are the ruins of Gathland, his mansion home. Clashes in this vicinity culminated in the Battle of Antietam. Plaques in the Crampton Gap detail the various manoeuvres in this hectic phase of the Civil War. The expedition came to Rocky Run Lean-To about sunset as the singing of robins and thrushes joined the purl of the nearby stream. Later, a whippoorwill was the vocalist. Could such a place be anything but restful? Then came Turner's Gap and the original Washington Monument, erected on the mountaintop by the people of Boonesboro. This area is a state park, complete with picnic tables, fireplaces and comfort stations. The stone memorial, restored by the CCC, has a spiral stairway and an observation deck on top. At Trailside a few miles north was a sign painted on a boulder. Annapolis Rock, 0.2 miles. It was a cliff with enormous boulders hanging on almost nothing, seeming to defy gravity. Black Rock and Raven Rock are similar places. Wolf Lean-To near Smithsburg Road was reached about an hour before sunset. Supplies were low as I headed for town, returning with only 27 cents in my pocket, but with enough food to last until the rendezvous with my father at Mount Alto. My supper was beef soup and bannock, mostly flour instead of cornmeal, baked in the fry pan. A dog at a nearby farm howled at intervals all night. Maryland also has a Devil's Racecourse along the trail, but it is larger and has a shelter nearby. The water source for the lean-to is a pit dug down to the underground stream. From this point, a trail leads to Katahdin recreational area. The weather was fine as I moved along, approaching the Mason-Dixon line, that historic but invisible line drawn to settle a dispute that brought on a war without battles between Maryland and Pennsylvania. The only indication of the line is a marker every mile. However, it symbolises north and south. Soon I was on familiar ground, the site of the Penmar Park, a resort that flourished years ago. After almost 2 months of foot rambling in Dixie, I was back in my native state. At a refreshment stand near the line, that 27 cents down to the last copper was squandered on soda and cookies to celebrate and more or less as a lunch. I had promised to notify various people when reaching this point, so mailed several cards before moving along to Mackey Run Lean-To and stopping for the night. Fog rolled in before morning and logging had disrupted the trail on the way to Antietam Lean-To, where I talked with a fisherman before passing through Old Forge Campground and climbing to Chimney Rocks. The view from there was nullified by the fog. A mile or so beyond, a group of Boy Scouts approached. It was Troop Number 475 from Baltimore, led by Scoutmaster Roland T. Karchner, newly organised and on their first long hike, from Route 30 at Caledonia to Route 40 at Maryland. A thunderstorm was brewing, so they hurried off in hopes of reaching shelter. The storm broke with lashing winds and heavy rain as I reached Snowy Mountain Tower and ducked under the porch of the ranger's cabin. This was to be the rendezvous, but no one was there, and no wonder. The weather was really atrocious. The storm abated an hour or so later, and I went on down the trail. My father was waiting at the first road crossing. He stared as though he couldn't believe his eyes. His middle son, roaming the mountains on foot, had actually turned up, alive and well. The Forestry School of Pennsylvania State University is located near Snowy Mountain. The school originated in a cabin known as the Hermitage, the site of a cabin now maintained by the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club as a trail cabin. Experimental plots of various trees and plants are maintained in the area between Snowy Mountain and Caledonia State Park. The oldest planting is a stand of white pines along Route 30, west of the trail crossing. These trees, planted under the direction of Gifford Pinchot, as one of the first silviculture experiments in the United States, are now mature enough to cut for saw timber. Before World War I, a magnificent stand of shortleaf pines stood on the property of Benjamin George near Mount Alto. This was the northernmost range of the species. Average height was 100 feet, without branches the first 60 feet, and diameters were 2.5 to 3 feet. When asked about cutting them, Mr. George always replied, "So long as my eyes remain open, those glorious trees will stand." After his death in 1914, cutting of the trees began, using war need as the excuse. None of them remains today. At the time of my trip, my sister Anne was working at Mount Alto Sanatorium. She had attempted to meet me at the tower, but was turned back by the violent storm. My dad and I now went there to talk with her. It was decided I would return home to check over literature received from the conference and to look at colour slides returned from processing, to stay overnight at home because of the distance, about 100 miles, and be brought back in the morning. This was the only night spent off the trailway. My youngest brother, John, brought me back, and Sister Anne was waiting at Snowy Mountain with a picnic lunch. Resuming the trek, I came to Caledonia Park, where crowds of people were everywhere, this being Sunday. At the crossing of Route 30 is the Thaddeus Stevens blacksmith shop. This building was captured and the nearby forge was destroyed when Confederate forces under General Lee passed on their way to the Battle of Gettysburg, returning the same way afterward. About 5 miles east of the trail crossing, at the headwaters of Conewago Creek, is White Squaw Mission. A young girl, Mary Jemison, was captured by the Iroquois in Conestoga Valley, beyond the Susquehanna River, and brought up Conewago Valley, en route to their territory in western New York State, just north of Kinzua in Pennsylvania. She later married a Seneca chief, and some of her descendants still live there. One of them, Abner Jemison, has shown me documentary proof of his lineage. A statue of Mary Jemison stands near the old mission and St. Ignatius Church in Buchanan Valley. Beyond the blacksmith shop in Caledonia Park is a large recreational area, and hundreds of people were picnicking or playing games as I passed through to Quarry Gap Lean-To. Woody Bauman, a lifelong friend, had decided to hike along a few days and join me there. The weather was fine as we started off the next morning. Soon we were seeing the anthills that were so numerous on South Mountain. Sometimes they are in groups, like villages, and some are 5 or 6 feet across and at least 2 feet tall. Naturalists say an anthill is like a city in itself, with an organised society in which individuals perform certain tasks. They will react very promptly if the anthill is disturbed. Their bite is very big for so small a creature, and they do not come alone. An anthill looks like a good place for a weary hiker to sit and rest, but surely isn't. North of Caledonia is an area known as Big Flat, where some parts were burned over so completely that only scrub oak grows. Woody and I arrived at Birch Run Lean-Tos as 3 boys were preparing to leave. They were from Baltimore and had happened upon the shelter by chance. They spoke in awed voices of a bird that came close at night, its eyes glowing red in the firelight and making a fearful noise. I imitated a whippoorwill and they nodded excitedly. Ah, salad days. How I hated to tell them it wasn't a great horned owl. Farther along, Woody and I passed Tumbling Run. The name is totally suitable. This stream drops from trailside on a steep slope in a crevice canyon with many pools and fractured waterfalls. The place remains cool on a hot summer day. On this same mountain ridge is a small tarn, its waters coming and going underground, inhabited by different species of frogs at different seasons, each so numerous that their voices create a continuous deafening sound. Also on this mountain are aftergrowths of the chestnut trees that once thrived here, large enough to produce chestnuts. Unfortunately, the shoots die after reaching a certain size and are replaced by others from the same stumps. The chestnut was once considered to be the most versatile and most valuable tree in central Appalachia before it was wiped out by an oriental blight. Because of the persistent aftergrowth, there is some hope that the species will someday re-establish itself. Copperhead snakes are found along this section also. In fact, my younger brother Evan and I killed a 3-foot specimen when hiking there back in the 30s, when still in our middle teens. Woody and I didn't see any, but did come upon a milk snake, which looks very similar but is entirely harmless. After that, Woody said he was perfectly willing to walk second at all times. Actually, the danger of snakebite is almost nil on the Appalachian Trail. The greatest danger is crossing a busy highway, especially a 4-lane. When hiking, it is best to wear full-length pants. If a snake does strike, it is likely to catch the cloth instead of your leg. Bare legs are also an invitation to various insects, which are the bane of woods travellers. Poison ivy and sunburn are some of the other reasons for long pants. At Tom's Run lean-to, the trail branched, one loop traversing Sunset Rock and rejoining the main trail at Pine Grove Cabin. As we approached, I told Woody of the time Evan and I came there and decided to pitch our tent in back. We had almost finished when a car came up the approach road. The people dashed up, unlocked the door, flung open the back windows, and there we were. No one could have decamped faster than we did. Just beyond the cabin are the ruins of Pine Grove Furnace. Some of the finest Franklin stoves ever made were produced there. The furnace was built in 1760 and was used to make weapons for the Continental Army, continuing in operation nearly 150 years. The ore came from the pits farther down the valley that are now Fuller and Laurel Lakes in Pine Grove Furnace State Park. Woody and I stopped at the store, located in a large stone building near the Rangers' headquarters. People lounging about stared but said nothing. As we were coming out, a small boy ventured to ask where we were heading. When I mentioned Maine, everyone suddenly crowded around. One of them was Duncan Harkin, a member of the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club. We stopped at Whitestone Spring, just beyond Fuller Lake, and camped on a nearby charcoal flat. These are seen in the vicinity of all the old furnaces and were the hearths used to burn the charcoal necessary in the iron-making process. Because of the threat of a storm, we put up a poncho shelter, but the storm never came over Holly Mountain. In the morning, we passed the side trail to Pole Steeple, a quartzite outcrop overlooking Laurel Lake, as though from an airplane. Across the valley is Holly Mountain, where I first caught mountain fever. It was there, one night in October, that I first opened up a mountain spring and slept out under the moon and stars. At Tag Run, one of my old and favourite haunts, Woody and I left our packs by the lower lean-to while going upstream to the spring. My extra camera, which Woody was using, was left with the packs. When we returned, the Argus C3 was gone. Fishermen were in the area and a small village is nearby, so we never did learn what became of it. Fortunately, my retina was taken along. By evening, we were at Whiskey Spring Lean-to, named for a place that actually was about a mile away. The AT has since been relocated to past the spring and the lean-to is long gone. The name goes back to logging days when one of the timber cutters liked his whiskey cold and kept it hidden in a recess under a stone back of the spring. In the morning, Woody and I crossed Long Mountain, climbing the fire tower to survey the countryside. To the south, jutting from the Piedmont between Hanover and York, we saw the Pigeon Hills, named for the passenger pigeons that once nested there in great numbers. This beautiful bird, larger and more brightly coloured than the mourning dove, was once considered the most numerous bird species on earth. A single flock would sometimes obscure the sun. They were exterminated by market hunters, the nestlings being considered a delicacy. Eventually, the birds still living, thousands of them, were too old to reproduce. When they died, there was nothing. Southeast of Long Mountain is another group of hills with the Conewago Creek flying through them in a deep and winding valley. Nestled among these hills is Gifford-Pinchot State Park, surely one of the most beautiful in the country. Nearby is Round Top, the highest and most impressive peak in York County. This was the first memorable mountain I ever climbed with my oldest brother, Dan. We climbed the steep and rocky western side, and Dan almost had to drag me the last few hundred feet. The Gifford-Pinchot Trail from the AT to the park will soon be opened up across Round Top and other peaks. Round Top is now a popular skiing centre. At Long Mountain, Woody turned on a side trail toward Dillsburg to catch a bus home. He didn't say so, but his feet must have been hurting. The trail turned through Dark Hollow, then up a steep pitch to Centre Point Knob. This little peak, near the northern end of South Mountain, was calculated to be the original halfway point and was marked by a bronze plaque. Many changes have come since, and the actual centre will not be known until all the trailway is permanent. I paused at Centre Point Knob to rest and to consider the future. So far, my goal had been to reach Pennsylvania. About 2 miles north of the knob is Boiling Springs, said to be the third largest spring in the world, with a flow of about 1 million gallons a day. The flow never changes, and the temperature is always 51 degrees, regardless of season or weather. The water is almost pure chemically, though it surfaces in a limestone valley and the source is unknown. Hundreds of years ago, this was a favourite Indian campground. Now it is a picturesque village of boiling springs. The Indian school at Carlisle, a few miles to the north, was made famous by Jim Thorpe, the greatest natural athlete this country has ever produced. He excelled in any sport the first time he tried it. Centre Point Knob and nearby areas are still known to old-timers as Indian Peg, where local tribes held their councils. South Mountain ends abruptly about 2 miles east of Centre Point, near Dillsburg. This is the northernmost limit of the Blue Ridge, which is interrupted only by water gaps all the way to Georgia and Alabama. The general upthrust does continue east of the Susquehanna as a broken series of low ridges and pinnacles to the Delaware River. The Appalachian Trail, of necessity, turns north and crosses the Great Valley to the Alleghenies. There was no temptation now to head for home, though it was only 20 miles away. It had been a long and rugged hike, but the beginning of June is not a proper time to stop walking with spring. I had long since promised myself to keep going as long as nothing critical happened. Now the prospects were good for venturing to the highlands of New England and the end of the endless trail. The long cruise would continue.